Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know it's a bit earlier than normal, but due to our feedback, we found that this was probably our best time. Yes, we are still going to record this, and we will post it up as of tomorrow. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started with today's monthly meetings. We are going to be talking primarily about EFL gain MSGs. There are a few different kinds of EFL MSG gains. So we wanted to kind of make sure all the clarification was there when we talk about different things to federal tables, what they are and what they mean, different things like that. So uh, as always, our data maintenance. First question I always ask is, have you logged into into UASys recently to enter data? Remember that our policy is that data should be entered every 2 weeks at minimum. In the system. So we do want you to make sure that you are logging in at least every other week to enter data. Those that enter it on a weekly basis or a daily basis, thank you very much. What it does is it helps us at the state level and also at the program level to run your data, see if there's any sort of problems, concerns that we're running into, because a lot of how we run our Third Thursdays and any of the conversations that we have are all based upon the data that we see from you guys. So it is something that is very crucial for us to make sure that you have logged in recently. If you do have questions about logging in or password issues, please let us know. We're happy to help you get logged in. Again, second question is your data entered in a timely manner? Again, we do say that every 2 weeks is the state policy, so please make sure you're not any farther behind. Data entered is great, but we also want to make sure that data is also cleaned up. What I mean by that is, are there any users that are no longer active in your program? Do they need to be deactivated? Are there classes that have ended that you need to close? Those are the kind of data things that we want to just make sure are all cleaned up inside of the system. The last thing is, have you set an EFL for each of your students? Primarily, we do this all through a pre-post test, so making sure you pre-test your students. However, we do know that there are some situations in which you would need to set a provisional entering EFL for your students, so making sure that that gets set appropriately. And then for those that have applied for an alternative placement for EFLs, making sure that you do enter those in for those students that you are going to alternatively place. If you have any questions about entering any of the entering EFLs, we're happy to answer those questions. A couple of reminders that I have had as I've been programming, talking with you guys as users, is when you are sending in questions for fixes for students, please send us the student ID. I don't know the students near as well as you guys do, and so simply giving me a name does not always make it to where I know which student I'm talking or I'm trying to fix. If I'm trying to find a bunch of Jennifer Smiths, there might be 4, 5, 6 Jennifer Smiths, and it takes me 10, 15 minutes to try to find exactly which one. As I don't usually log into the into the UASys system in order to find that student. I do it all on the back end on the database, and I run everything via a student ID. So please, when you are sending those fixes, it just makes our speed up the process a little bit quicker so that we can get those questions answered or those fixes fixed. With that, if you are requesting a data merge, that needs to be merged between the two. Maybe there was a test that got entered in on the one that you're trying to delete, but it never got entered in on the other one. I'm moving that information over. So please, when you do ask for a merge, please send me both IDs. Don't just send me a single ID, as well as don't send me just a name, because I have ran into the issue in which the names are not exactly the same. And so I'm trying to find and search for these. If you send us the IDs, it will just help speed along the process, and we are able to get your problem solved faster. Staff accounts. Staff accounts have been known to be duplicated in the past, especially when we moved into this new system and just trying to get used to everything. We did create some duplicated staff accounts. I did message out late last week to a handful of programs about staff members' accounts that I saw that could potentially be duplicates. I based it on the first and last name, and that's really all I could base it on. I then needed to see if they were duplicates. If you do happen to create a duplicate account, please just send that up our way. We are happy to get those fixed. We treat them just like student IDs. We move anything that we need to, and then we delete the old ones. So just remember that staff accounts can potentially be duplicated, and if it does happen, just send it our way. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about MSGs, specifically our EFL MSGs. I want to give quite a quick overarching background on MSGs, what I call the MSG hierarchy. The big thing to know about MSGs, especially when we report them on our table fours, is that the most recent MSG is the one that is going to be shown on the table four. So whatever, doesn't matter what they've earned in the past, if they earned a more recent MSG now, that is what is going to show. The only caveat with that is if the MSGs are earned on the exact same day, then we use this hierarchy that IET MSGs will show before HSE MSGs, and both of those will show before our EFL MSGs. So keep that in mind to where, for example, if you graduate a student, say you graduated them last week, you marked it all in, the student has an HSE MSG, you called the student, they came in and you gave them a post test and they earned a level gain. That level gain EFL MSG is going to show on table 4, not the HSE MSG. So when you are looking at how many students you graduated this year, that kind of stuff, please make sure that you are not comparing your numbers that you believe you have graduate students to the HSE numbers on table 4, but that it is whatever their most recent one. The achievements report is your best one if you are trying to look for graduates. Chris, you have a question.
Yeah, so just want to clarify. So within our IET program, if we put in they graduated from high school, but then they also received their Davis Tech credential on the same day, the IET credential, I don't want to say overrides the HSE, but takes precedence over the HSE. Is that correct?
That is correct. So when you
Okay.
pull up table 4 for that student, IET is going to show over HSE.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. No, that's a great question. Okay, if there's Anna, question.
Okay, so one thing we've noticed, if we have students who get MSG for passing a section of the GED, but then we post test them and they don't get a gain, it erases the off of their first page, it erases the gain from the GED. Can you explain that?
You will have to send those to me, as that should not be happening, which means it's a bug.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. Any other questions on this page? Okay. Again, you are welcome to come off of mute for questions. We also have the chat that's open and available if you do have any questions that you'd like to type in there. Okay, so let's talk about our EFL MSGs. EFL MSGs are not just student earns a level gain on their post test, they get an EFL MSG. Going back to what Anna said, student passing a GED subtest, for example, is also an EFL MSG. There are two that we don't talk about very often, as our numbers are quite low inside of Utah for these, but they are Carnegie units and our post-secondary entry. I will talk about each one of these more in depth as we go through today. But these are the 4 different ways that you can, or that students should be earning an EFL MSG or can earn an EFL MSG. So let's talk about the most popular type, the pre-post testing EFL MSG. Again, this is the most earned type. Probably 90% of our students that earn an EFL MSG, this is how they would have earned it. This is earned pretty easily by a student taking a post-test within the period of participation and making a level gain on that. One thing that you'll want to keep an eye on when you do look at this is that the period of participations can span over multiple years. And so the test that we are comparing, your test that the student took may not actually be in this program year. For example, if you gave a student a CASAS reading test this year, and the test and it scored, say, an ABE level 5, it may show a level gain if the ABE level, the next test that they took prior to that is an ABE level 4 in the last program year. With that, the one caveat is that a student can only ever achieve the level once per period of participation. So for example, if a student pre-tests in an ABE level 3, they post-test as an ABE level 4, there is a level gain that gets achieved for that student. However, if the pre-test is at a 3, they post-test and drop down to a 2, and then they take another post-test 40 hours later and gain up to a 3, that does not achieve a level gain as they have already plateaued at that ABE level 3 due to their pre-test. And so what we'll see a lot of the times is that we will see this dip happen with students at the beginning of a program year, or when the students pre-tested this program year, and then they'll go back up to, say, an ABE level 3 in this case. But because a prior test has already achieved that in the same period of participation, it will not translate into an EFL MSG. So when you do have those questions, that is the biggest thing that I usually check is, has the student already achieved that level for that test type somewhere else? If they have, that's the reason an EFL MSG will not show. But if they haven't, then we usually see those pre-post tests be achieved. Our next one we'll talk about are our Carnegie units. This is a rare one that happens for our students, and it only happens after we run a process. There is no default process that is constantly ran over students for this. However, for a student to achieve this, there are a couple of prerequisites that a student must do. First, the student must have earned at least 6 credits within the program year, 6 adult education credits. Once they earn those 6 credits, what we'll do is at the end of the program year, or when they end, we will look to see how many credits the student has left before they graduate. If the student has less than 6 credits, meaning that they are going into their quote 12th grade year, we can mark the student as having earned a Carnegie unit. So there are a couple of stipulations that we do. However, I mentioned that this isn't a process that runs on a regular basis. This only happens after we run it at the state level. And so what happens is we'll run this process. And one of the things that we do double check is that we want to make sure that the student hasn't earned any other type of MSG. This really is kind of just a last-ditch effort to kind of catch any MSGs for students, because what happens is if a student does qualify for this and hasn't earned another MSG, we bump their entering EFL up to an ABE level 5, and then we award the MSG, meaning that the following year they go in as a level 6. Which means, a pre-post test won't necessarily usually work. And so really we're just trying to, the next MSG that the student would be earning will be that HSE MSG. There was a question that just came in that says, when do I normally run this process? That process is usually ran in August at some point. I try to wait as long as possible. It's always after the dual year entry period happens. So as once that happens, then we run this process through that will add these Carnegie units to the students. So programs will never see a dip in MSGs when they do this, nor will they ever see a transfer of MSGs, for example, from an HSC to an EFL MSG. The only thing that you would potentially see is you would see your ABE level 5 population increase, but you'll see your EFL increase at the same time. So this is not a negative thing for programs to be aware to fear for their students. This is just an extra way for us to try to capture some additional MSGs. But again, there are specific stipulations that they have to do in order to achieve this MSG. Are there questions about the first two, the pre-post test or the Carnegie units? Okay. Let's talk quickly about the last two that we have. So the post-secondary entry, in order for the student to achieve this, they must enter the post-secondary education or a training by the end of the program year. The catch with this one is it always has to be done by June 30th of the year that we are reporting. So I data match twice a year with USHE, and whatever dates they give me on when the student started is what I end up and when I enter. One of those data match times I do is in August. The other one actually just happened here in February. But a student must enter the post-secondary education before that happens. Now, this can be recorded one of two ways. I did mention that I would do it through data matches, but if you do know of students that do enter into post-secondary, whether it's before they've left your program or after they've left your program, you can do that on the student's achievement page. One thing we have seen is just making sure that it's recorded under the appropriate period of participation. When you get to the achievements page, you will see multiple periods of participation if the student has been with you multiple times. So just make sure that you do mark that under the appropriate one. It's simply the entered into post-secondary. You can click yes and you hit save down at the bottom, and that enters the student into having achieved this. Again, the process will then run. You'll then see an EFL MSG for the student having or going into post-secondary. This was changed recently. Before, the student had to have exited out of adult education before they entered, but with our recent changes, this last year, this is something that has happened. A question came in and says, what type of evidence do you need to support the post-secondary achievement, and where should we house that if we enter it? I would suggest that the evidence you would have would be inside of just the student's file, whether that's digital or a physical file, just keep that under. Stephanie, I see you're on. What kind of evidence would we be looking for? What kind of evidence can we get?
Hang on, let me see if I can find that in guidance.
Okay. As Stephanie's looking up that, Nikki, you have a question?
I do. So the only way that this is a gain is if it's during the program year. It's not, if it happens like after, then it's not a gain.
Correct. So this type of gain only happens if the student is entered post-secondary before June 30th of the year we're doing. If the student entered post-secondary the following year, it doesn't count as an EFL gain, mostly because the student's not active in that year that they would actually have entered. Now, with that said, when it comes to reporting purpose, or not reporting purposes, but for funding purposes, we actually do look at a 3-year gap for students. And so, yes, we still would want that information, as well as post-secondary. We does count on table 5, and that can happen outside of the program year. But when we specifically talking entering EFL MSGs, that entry needs to happen before June 30th of the program year.
Thank you.
Sure. Stephanie, were you able to find that?
No, give me a second. I'm almost there.
I understand. Well, we will, I guess, what this is.
Any other questions related around post-secondary as we try to get the evidence answered? Have I done February's match yet? Yes, actually, I just got that done earlier this week. So you will see some students will have, some may have a new EFL MSG. that probably would be separated students. But your table 5 numbers for this program year probably would have gone up. So yes, I have done this one. And so as of right now, they should all be updated. Chris, do you have another question?
I do, just kind of a sidebar question, but does pertain to this. Do you have an update on when we'll be able to do digital uploads into Oasis?
Right now, there is some NRS requirements that I am trying to get programmed in so that we can go into the summer with not with everything ready to go reporting wise. So uploads are going to be my next project that I'm going to work on. I've got to work with IT here at the USBE office to get some of those to upload properly. We were running into some issues with the downloading, so I assume we're going to run into some issues with the uploading. We were able to get those resolved. So that's going to be my next project. I'm hoping that the next update will come at the beginning of April, and I'm hoping it to be in there. If it's not in April's, it'll be in my next ones, which will probably be mid-May. Okay, any other questions? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and go on, and once Stephanie finds that answer, we will come back to what we are looking for evidence. The last one is a new one that started. It started last program year, but towards the end of last program year. But it's brand new this year, and that's a student is able to pass a GED subtest, and it will be marked as an entering EFL. Anna brought this up earlier, as it seems that some of those are actually being removed, which they should not be. Again, if you do see those kind of things, please let me know. Again, we would want to make sure that this is happening correctly. And then I always run once I get the fix done, I do rerun the process so that it does update everything correctly. But to pass the GED subtest, the student just needs to go take the GED, and then it should automatically get marked in UASIS. This is primarily achieved through data matching. If you are manually entering GEDs, this will be marked. However, you must have documentation that the student has either passed or, well, the only ones that you can actually mark is that the student has earned their GED, and you have to have documentation for that, and then we'll mark this student as passing a subtest. There is no way for you guys to manually mark the passing of a GED subtest. But yeah, if you do enter a GED that they've completed manually, this entering EFL will get automatically marked as well. Know that with the hierarchy of how these would work, the GED, HSC, MSG will take precedence over the entering or over the EFL MSG. But we do want to report these, as we do report these on a couple of tables, and we'll go over which tables we report these in just a minute. Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can obviously do it the data match. The other options are a copy of the enrollment record, file documentation with notes from program staff. So that sounds like really you just have to have, I don't know, that's what it says. File documentation with notes from program staff. That's pretty simple. School records or a transcript or a report card. So like for you, Chris, I mean, if you're partnering with Davis Tech, for instance, you don't necessarily have to have some formal documentation because you're coordinating with them anyway, if that makes sense. Yeah.
For sure. I was just curious. So like if we had students at Salt Lake Community College and we had an O-Track copy of their class schedule, would that be acceptable as long as it had? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, if there's any other questions about this, what counts for documentation, Danielle and Stephanie are much better suited to answer those questions. Oh, and Jeff are much better suited to answer those than I am. I kind of just show you guys where to report all this information. One thing with all the documentation, we do actually keep track of what is data matched versus what is manually entered. So we can see the difference. So don't think that you can mark something and say, oh, it was data matched, because we do have flags on the back end that get marked one way or the other. So we can tell what is being manually entered and what is not. So any questions regarding the 4 types of EFL MSGs that we report on? Okay. Last thing I want to talk about is just where you can see these. Now, primarily, yes, you can see which students have earned their EFL MSG by Table 4. However, remembering the hierarchy, that would only show that if their most recent EFL MSG is is EFL, will show on Table 4. So if a student had a pre-post test and then they earned their diploma 3 days later, the diploma is going to show regardless if the student did have a pre-post test. However, Table 4A does give you information about every student's EFL MSG, regardless of whatever their most recent one was. So with Table 4, it does break out all 4 types. However, the one thing that it does additionally do is it breaks out your pre-post test between ESL literacy as a column and math as a column as well. But it does break it out to where you can see all of the types of EFL MSG. One thing to note on here is if a student does earn more than one type of EFL MSG, for example, they earn their GED and they earn a pre-post test, yes, it's all considered one EFL MSG. However, on Table 4, the student will show under the pre-post test column and they will show under the GED column. So they can potentially show under more than one column. And again, those are only the detailed columns, which I believe are columns C through I. On that table, or column B, is a unique count of how many students in each entering EFL. So if you try to total up all the detailed columns, it may not total up to what your actual column B total is, because of a student could potentially show up more than once. If you downloaded the details and looked at each student individually, that's where you could actually see, which dates the student earned each one of them on. So that's how you could actually tell from a more granular detailed about which if a student is checked into each one. Steph?
Yeah, and I would say this particular report we use pretty extensively when we're doing our federal competitions. So, because it does break it out between ESL literacy and math, and we can see overall for all reportable and for all enrollees, how many students have gotten level gains. So being familiar with Table 4A is not a bad idea.
Thank you. Yeah, especially I believe competition is coming up next year. And so if you do plan to compete for federal grant monies, getting to know Table 4A and making sure that your numbers are looking good on Table 4A would definitely be a high priority for you guys to look at. So that is all I have got today. Are there any questions regarding any sort of MSGs or any questions regarding any of our tables? Nikki, go ahead.
Okay, so it's not directly related, but somewhat. So I'm just curious about if a program has summer school in June, and let's say there were students that, had been enrolled during the year and they were studying for the GED, but they took their GED in July after the program year had ended. I'm just curious. How does that count or does it not count?
You mean, does it count for the previous year?
Yes.
No, it does not count for an EFL MSG, as the student needs to have earned it within the program year. So if you do have students that are taking their GED in like early July, I would recommend that you do pull them in for some sort of counseling session, something that you can be able to continue their period of participation on, so that way you do get them counted. We have looked at this population in the past before, and we do see some students that this happens to. It's not a large population by any means, but it does happen to a handful. And if you do want to capture those students, our recommendation is that you pull them in for some sort of counseling session. Maybe it's to talk about going into post-secondary, like what's next on their docket. That way you can add those hours into UASIS, and that will carry the student's period of participation over into the next program year, and then the GED will count for you on your tables.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There was a question that came up. Actually, there was two questions I missed. One says, are we going to be able to access transcript photos that we've downloaded into Utopia, into the old Utopia? You can actually do that now, so you should be able to access any transcripts, any documentation that you've already uploaded into old Utopia. We have access into UASIS. You can download those right now. The upload process is what is still coming. The next question is, we could get more than one level gain from GED, right? If they took over, if they took over the 2 years. Yes, if I'm understanding how that is. So what you could do is you would get a level gain from the GED in, say, the current school year, and then if they took and passed it in July, that would be another EFL MSG, as well as if they passed their GED at the same time, that would be the HSE MSG on top of that. Again, those would happen on the same day. But in order for those next two to technically count, the student would need to carry over into the next program year. And so that's where you would potentially find, again, that would be the pulling the student in to kind of get any sort of contact hour to carry that period into the next program year. But yes, you could technically get more than one level gain from a GED, but it would have to be between 2 program years. Any other questions? Nikki, is that a new question or just an existing hand up from last time? Nope, perfect. Okay, all right. Thank you guys for coming. I'm glad to see. Oh, go ahead, Steph.
Wait, before you finish, I appreciate you guys thinking about like different scenarios and stuff. I do want to just close with this kind of a philosophical like mindset, that making sure when you're serving students that you're serving students to their best interest, and then being strategic about how you can make those into MSGs, versus being strategic about how you, like, being more concerned about how you're reporting MSGs and students' needs are secondary. It should be the other way. Students' needs are primary, and then your strategy comes into play afterwards, right? If that makes sense. So, and what I mean there is that if it doesn't make sense for the student to come back in, and you're just trying to count the MSG after they get the GED the next year, and it doesn't make sense for the student to come back in and you don't have any meaningful service to offer them, then by golly, you just let them go, because that's not serving the student, that's serving your program. So anyway, encourage you to think about the student's needs first.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming. Looks like this was a great time to change to. I think we have more attendees now than I have in a lot of years or in a lot of months. So we'll have next month. So thank you very much, and this will be uploaded tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
Are you still here, Adam? Adam, are you gone?
No, I am not.
Okay, so I have an unrelated question. Is it okay if I ask?
Yeah.